My name is Chad Nall, and I teach chemistry, environmental science, and AP environmental science at Eastham Charter High School in Little Rock. I am fortunate that our campus is actually on the campus of UA Little Rock. So I've had some unique opportunities over the years. This is my second Strive experience and several takeaways, but one big one for me is through this program, I get to the opportunity to put into practice the real world skills and even the concepts that I'm teaching in my classroom. And it's like I say here in my quote, for 4 weeks, I'm the learner. I really believe it's making me a better teacher, and it's translating into students who are more curious. And actually, I'll share a little bit about some of my outcomes in just a minute. But this summer, I worked for Central Arkansas Water, and as Mark said, and Jane could attest, 3 of us in the same placement, all with really different experiences. Because of what I teach and my interest and background, I spent 4 weeks outside doing things where a lot of people would have been miserable. I worked in the watershed pretty much exclusively. I worked under the supervision and with the supervision of their resource management specialist, Ben Tessing, and their land management specialist, Brian Rupar, doing several different tasks. Some of them were related to sustainable forestry initiatives, where I worked with interns doing tree survivorship studies. Basically, we went in open fields on 95-degree days and counted the number of trees that were still alive after a year, that were planted a year ago. I waded streams, doing macroinvertebrate sampling as water quality indicators, shocked fish in streams, doing diversity studies, did forest plot pre and post burn assessments. I even spent a couple days with their land, with Brian, doing evaluating and estimating the cost of some damaged trees by a private landowner. And I'll share about that in just a minute. That relates to my lessons that I did this summer. Got to work one or 2 days with CAW as they partnered. CAW, what most people don't realize, the average customer doesn't realize, is the number of partnerships they have. And so we spent a day with several organizations collecting native plant seeds. And so got to be a part of that. And then finally, I got one day where I actually got to help teach the Power of Water seminar in the very thing that one of my partners shared about, and that was macroinvertebrate sampling. And so that's just a snapshot of the few things that I was doing all summer long. And it was neat to be a part of a company where I felt like what Mark said, I believe that not only was I learning something, but I truly believe that I was adding value to the summer and helping the company do things that they couldn't do. Ben, their resource management specialist, would repeatedly say that the interns, including myself, and the work we did this summer really helped his job and able to do things that they wouldn't be able to do. And so I felt like what I was doing was meaningful. I was always curious, and I worked with people who were just so gracious, and I loved it. It scratched that research itch that I get as a research scientist background, and I got to bring it into my classroom. And so how did I bring that into my classroom? Well, I did a variety of things this year. My main Strive lesson was actually not just one lesson, but it revolved around an entire unit on sustainability. And in environmental science, sustainability isn't just a unit, it is a thread and a theme that is taught throughout the whole year. And so
1 minute warning.
Yes. And so I was able to teach some sustainability concepts around the carbon cycle. And we used several experiences, and I used a case study. And it's a current case study that the company's dealing with. So I was able to use a news story of a landowner who basically took it upon himself to clear some trees to get a better view of Lake Maumelle. And so we were able to explore that case. And at the end of the unit, and I'll answer questions about details on it. The students had a mock debate on whether they would vote to find the man, or whether he did it innocently. And so just that debate, they had to learn so many concepts related to sustainable forestry, to carbon cycle, to ecosystem services. And we did lots of labs through those unit. But at the end of the unit was just a class debate. And it was so fun to watch them get into that debate and offer arguments from evidence, and state their opinions, because they couldn't state an opinion without supporting it with evidence. And so I wanted to share, I don't have a formal post assessment. What I have is just comments and reflections on that process. And here are a few of those comments that students shared. Through the process, one day, one of my students just said, "Mr. Nall, we learned way more than science." When we were doing carbon sequestration of trees, we had to identify the trees. I had 2 different students tell me they were going to go home and share the app that we use with their families and identify the trees in their neighborhood. And so, and a student, we were creating spreadsheets and creating graphs, and the student was like, "Mr. Nall, I've never known how to do this." And they're using this stuff in other classes. So those were some of the takeaways for me. And I'll be glad to answer any questions about specifics of the lessons, but you can see in bullet point some of my big takeaways from my experience. And for Jane and CAW, and for those of you who haven't done it, this has probably been more helpful to me than any other professional development I've ever done. And I can see the difference in my kids every day.
If I'll send you my email, Chad, can you share some of that with me, some of your research? I just wanted to look at it and take a look.
I'll have to get permission from CAW because it's their research that they did. So I wasn't, but I could put you in contact with, or Jane could actually, but that's not my research to give away, unfortunately. I mean,
well, everything we do is subject to FOI, so yeah, you can give it away.
Okay, I'll share with you what I got.
One of the points that Chad brings up there is one of the things that we try to think about deeply at our professional development gatherings during the summer. There's 4 days that the teachers spend together over the summer, and then this one day in the winter where it's kind of professional development focused, is how do we know what we're doing makes a difference in our students in our classroom. It's great to feel good and to be connected to a community, but does that really result in our students being more well prepared, either skills wise or content knowledge wise, or having career connections? And so we're always trying to think, what are the best ways that we can collect data on the actual implementation with our students? And so you'll see a lot of different ways of doing that. So what Chad presented was some more qualitative data on, student comments and the little bit less tangible things. And we're always trying to think about what are some of the other more tangible ones that we can look at and measure. What questions do y'all have for Chad?
Chad, I just really want to commend you for not just introducing the scientific concepts, but also introducing the concept of trust the expert, because the data is there to support this conclusion. And I think that is a skill that as a country we do not have.
Right.
So I'm really happy to see that in the classroom, in such a practical example. Like, okay, guys, you're the scientist, you've got the data. How do you debate this point? How do you back up what you're saying with facts? And so that it makes me feel better that this is being introduced in some classrooms. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and it was fun because I was using a very current real world example to teach concepts. Like, students didn't realize that to form an opinion on whether the, what should the fine have been for the guy, all right, and his family, for the guy, and we're like, well, it's not as simple as did he do something wrong? It was, what's the value of a tree? Well, so students were introduced to all kinds of ways to do that. They had to go out and around Mueller's campus, right around our building, they were using diameter tape, measuring tree circumferences, converting that to the tons of carbon sequestered every year in those trees. They were measuring surface temperatures with infrared thermometers, measuring the difference between temperatures with soil under trees, outside of trees, on different surfaces. And so it was a lot of fun, and they had fun. And it was a long, slow process. That was probably 5 to 6 weeks of learning that they did. And the one thing I'll say that I saw in my presentation is, if we have time, I'd like to share a tool that I use that I just started this year. So I can't give you data on if it makes a difference or not. But because of my experience at Strive this summer, and because of what we did for Strive last summer, I use a quarterly student reflection on their learning, not what they learn, but those components that we talked about as a successful student. And I've done 2 of them now. Each quarter I meet with each one of my students, and they fill out and rate themselves on many of the skills we mentioned in the Jamboard, and I rate them too, and we have a discussion on their learning and with those skills. And that's the first year I've done that, and it's all because of my experience in Strive.
I think sharing that would be great. If you want to share your screen while you're, it looks like John has another question for you.
Oh, yeah, I got a question, Chad. You're talking about a debate. You probably could even pull in cross-curricular. You talk about history or government teachers. Well, what's your right as a citizen on your legal property? I'm thinking you could really expand that and make people quote stuff like, well, if that's your belief, show me where you would gain that from. I just think it could post a big equal. I mean, you could have a debate on a lot of issues and say, well, it seems a lot more than just, well, here's scientific evidence. Let's base it on every way, you know?
Yes.
Does that
And I'll
sound?
be honest with you, it was my first ever attempt to do anything like that in the classroom. So when I did I always do a reflection on new activities for myself for the next year. I could have done that mock debate better. I learned a lot. It was pretty rough for a first one, but the kids had fun. I felt like it accomplished what I hoped it would. And I look forward to doing it again next year, even better, with a more formal observation on it. So, but you're.
Hey, I remember my second year as a teacher. I developed this attitude my second year as a teacher. I started doing a lot more labs, and I said, every time you do a lab, the first time or new activity, there's some screw up. You just learn from it. So it happens.
Yeah. So this was a big learning. But here's the tool I use to be completely forthcoming on it. It comes from my experience at Strive, plus another professional development training I did at the same time last summer. But between that development training and my experience at Strive, it led me to being committed to reflecting with my students and helping them assess themselves in these areas right here. And so at the end of the first quarter, they did this. They did it at the beginning of the year. And then this is an example of one student's at the end of the second quarter. And I pull them up to my desk. We talk for like 2 minutes after they've rated themselves. And you can see I'm honest with them. This student gave themselves a 3. I gave them a 1, and I explained exactly why I would give them a 1. And so I presented this at the beginning of the year to my students because of my Strive experience, and talked about the importance of workplace and skills and things beyond just concepts in the classroom. So
Chad, is that something that you'd be willing to share with people that would like to see it?
Absolutely. It is linked in my slides.
Fantastic. And maybe what you can do is underneath self-reflection, say authored by, and make sure you have like attributing information. So if people decide to use this, or if it gets out further, that at least it has a link back to you.
Yeah, I have a differentiated, one of my ecosystem services of trees lab is there, which that's my most structured one. And so some of the resources I used are linked on my last slide that people might be interested in.
Great.
This
I think
is
Elaine
so
has.
great. Yeah, so what this is hitting on with me is I've spent the last couple of years in supply chain, but I spent 8 years managing hourly employees with production. So actually on the production floor, operators running lines. And what I really love about your performance evaluation is it is so similar to the way that we evaluate, especially workers on the floor. And what I would maybe challenge, or maybe I'm asking, is a lot of times on some of these more qualitative measures, you know, as a manager, as a floor supervisor, I'm giving this feedback and it's being ignored. You know, whenever you see that misalignment, I think on the first item, the student rated themselves as the best score and you had rated them as the lowest. Really adults, and I think, you know, children too, this is something we need to teach everyone. Whenever there's that misalignment, how do you have that conversation? Like, how do you get aligned with your manager or with your peer or with your teacher? And so I'm just, it's great to see that being introduced in schools, because honestly, from my educated background, you know, you got a grade and it was kind of black and white. You either got the question right or you got it wrong. But when you start talking about some of these more qualitative work skills, it's not always black or white. And so you have to be able to align, you know, champion yourself, but also accept feedback from
Yes.
your manager.
Yes, a good example is for this particular student. I asked them why they gave themselves a 3 and offer suggest from evidence, say, no, and then I told them why I gave them a 1. And then the other thing for those of us who teach, it's a benefit. I can use this in my parent teacher conferences for the students whose parents. I pulled this up at parent teacher conferences. And showed them what their, you know, what their students rated themselves and what I rated them at and why. I also can compare, like if a student's not doing, I can look at how they're performing grade wise in my classroom, and I pull up this and I will compare what their grade is to what they rate themselves. Because and so it gives me a lot of data and a lot of information. It gives me something to talk to both kids and parents about. And I'm finding it useful. The last thing they'll do at the end of the year, this is for all my classes, even my AP class, they will write a 3-paragraph personal reflection on their growth as a learner this year at the end of the school year as part of their, it'll be a 4th quarter final assessment grade. And they all know that's coming. They know that's coming at the end of the year. So
Elaine, is Elaine there? I was going to have to say,
Yep.
make a statement to her.
Mhm.
Actually, I'll tell you, I worked as a chemist years ago and I was shocked at how many different jobs and all. And I did work biology, chemistry, and all that. I heard 4 or 5 years ago when I was with a previous STEM group in a state, the color chemist for Crayola came to speak to us. And she said, how many STEM workers does it take to make one Crayola marker? And she gave us a presentation. It said 45 took that, because you think about, you have to have a translator on the box. You have to have a forklift driver. All of these things you don't think of. What does it take to make one Crayola marker get into production? Whether it's a translator on each box, it's shocking. These are all jobs it requires to have a STEM job. She said approximately 45 people to get one box of Crayola markers as a colored out there. So it
Yeah.
takes all these different aspects we don't think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great epiphany in when you start, you know, getting involved in manufacturing and seeing everything that goes into that product. And it's just such an awareness of how interconnected we all are in producing really anything. So yeah, definitely agree. It's amazing.